Isabel, founder and firebrand of the Uprising Spark.
Hi, I'm Kristen, author of The Age of the Child, and if you're watching this and not listening, I'm incredibly red for some reason. I don't know why that is.
Hi, I'm Lenora. I'm the creator of The Bitchy Bookkeeper, and we are the three founding non-mothers of Childfree Girls. Today's episode, we are going to be discussing why parents and non-parents should not be pitted against one another. And our guest today comes from Greece. You're coming from Greece, correct?
I'm Italian, but I'm in Greece right now.
Okay, excellent. This is Irene Caselli, and Irene is the correspondent for The Correspondent. Maybe you can introduce yourself and explain what you write for and why you contacted us, and we'll get the discussion going.
Sure. So I'm the first 1,000 Days Correspondent at The Correspondent, which is a member-funded online platform. And by first 1,000 days, I basically cover everything that has to do with the beginning of life. So from pregnancy, women's rights, abortion rights, reproductive rights, and early childhood. And my main idea in the work that I do is that to me, it's very important to explore under which circumstances people decide to have kids or have kids, and what kind of choice they have to have kids or not have kids, and how much that determines, I guess, the life of future citizens. So I look at it from a political perspective, also from a rights perspective. And I did get in touch with you guys because I've been very interested in thinking and talking about the idea of why we decide to have children at all, right? And I'm a mother myself. I have a 1.5-year-old child. I've always been interested in the idea of children as a political subject, let's say. And so I think I'm very interested in where you guys are coming from, because I think that oftentimes parents and non-parents are just kind of pitted against each other. And we create these wars around identity. Well, really, we should be all in with the same fights, which is really against patriarchy, right? And bigger things. But so I was very interested in starting off the chat with you and exchanging ideas, because I think it's a very productive space that we can create.
It is. Just right off the bat, I've always found, and I think the three of us agree on this issue of supporting one another, child-free and parents, because the parents who are open-minded are going to teach their children or make their children aware that parenthood is a choice. And I think that gets lost in the initial fight between the two different sides, where really, for me, it's still super important to have allies that can pass that information on.
Yeah, and I think that's fundamental. Like, I think that one of my main interests is really like how are ideas or inclinations born to begin with? And we were all children, right? So I'm really interested in children in as far as we all start off as children. And I'm very and I find it fascinating that in certain contexts, and fascinating and also really enraging, that in certain contexts, depending on the sex you're born with, you're expected a certain type of things or not. For a long time, for example, for a few years, I worked on a project on women's football or soccer. And I was based in Latin America for many years. I lived in Latin America for 10 years. My husband is Argentinian. And, I investigating the issue, for example, in the Gambia, but also so in Africa, but also in Argentina and Brazil. It was so shocking to find out but also somehow expected, unfortunately, that if you're born a girl, you are not expected to play football, and you shouldn't play football, soccer, because there's so many misconceptions that soccer will make you a lesbian, if that were a problem to begin with, but also because women's bodies are not made to play football. Like, just imagine that in Brazil, which is like this huge soccer-loving country, it was prohibited for women to play soccer until 1980. So why am I even talking about this? Because basically, to me, it's very much the same. Like, how can we parents make sure that we create as much freedom for our kids as possible to decide to just follow what they want to do? You know, do they want to be soccer players? Do they want to have their own kids? Do they not want to have their own kids? Like, why are we just kind of boxing them in? So to me, it's very important to look at it from that perspective. There should be a communication that is more productive between the two camps, if we want to talk about two different camps of like the child-free and the, parents,
What do you think is the impact of that, of the fact that there is that battle? Like, what is there some kind of larger implication, do you think, when you have parents and people who don't want to have kids pitted against each other? Like, what do you think? Do you think there's an end goal in some, almost in a, not an intentional or overt way, but, almost like there's no really overt effort. I don't think anybody is very conscious on the larger scale that we are trying to make women have children, but it is it's in there, it's everywhere that people are trying to make us have children. So I wonder if you think there's anything in the pitting of parents against child-free and what that does.
I think it's very bad for everyone, because in the end, I do think that this mandate that the mandate that especially women, especially in certain parts of the world that are maybe more religious, or, that they are expected to have children. In the end, it just really reinforces these ideas of patriarchy, right? And to me, I keep bringing up patriarchy as if it was, a very abstract concept, but it's actually a very real thing that I think we all experience in so many ways. And I think that when you pit parents and non-parents against each other, like parents and people that have decided not to have kids against each other, in the end, you're just kind of reinforcing this, because it's almost like if you as a parent just kind of hide behind the fact that people who don't want to have parents are insensitive, or they hate children, or they don't care about children, all things that to me are ridiculous, because some of my best friends have decided not to have kids, right? And I talk to them on a weekly basis, because they're in faraway places, about my kids, and they're very excited. So, and they often get back to me about how it's refreshing to have that, because other friends who have kids just kind of relegate themselves in a parent bubble. There's definitely a thing in there where it may be easier on an immediate level to just bubble up with other parents. But in the long run, it's super negative to me, because in the end, we just keep reinforcing these stereotypes and these mandates that in the end are toxic for all of us. And I think I have one thing that keeps coming back to mind, which is the clock ticking, the time thing, right? That keeps being brought up. And this is, I got pregnant when I was 37, and my pregnancy was considered a geriatric pregnancy, okay? I don't feel myself as an old person, but according to my doctors, I was going through an old person's pregnancy. And that is just the same issue. It's like, why are we calling pregnant people after a certain age, why are we deeming their pregnancies geriatric? And why are we even talking about age like this, right?
I thought it was called geriatric because of the health or the viability of the ovaries or the eggs.
Yeah, sure. But can we find a better word that is not as kind of full of heavy meaning, right? Like, can we call it like, I don't know, you guys come up with, I don't know. I keep asking myself this question because it puts a label that is not, it's not, it comes with consequences because, you get, of course, you do extra tests, which is maybe a good thing, but you also get, I don't know, I feel that you get put under the spotlight. Your choices, your whatever get put like under the spotlight. And I don't like the associations that come with that idea, why can't I just decide to have a kid when I'm 40? And if everything is fine, it's just fine. Like, you know?
Is there an age that you think is, for the sake of the child, is not a good idea to have a child? Because, you know, there will be women who say I should be able to have a baby at 60 if I want to. Okay, sure, if the only concern is you and what you want. But what about this kid who might have you die in 15 years just of regular old person causes? And then you have this 15-year-old dealing with a dead parent.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think it's very complicated. I am very wary of how far science can push things. Sometimes I wonder whether it's pushing certain things too far. I do think that, you know, if you look, I always find this interesting, like from a hormonal perspective, like when you used to have kids earlier, like when, you know, people used to have kids earlier, or in places where they have kids earlier, then their kids hit adolescence and puberty and like all the puberty hormones when maybe the women are hitting menopause. Like now, actually, sorry, now that we're having kids when we're older, like our kids, like, you know, my kid will hit puberty when I'm hitting menopause, and the combination of those hormones is awful. But when we used to have, it's true. It's like the worst kind of mix ever. But
come back on the show. Come back on the show when you're going through this, please.
Yeah, that's gonna be. I'm gonna be like, why did I even decide to have a kid then, etc. But when you have kids earlier, then you are probably becoming a grandparent, a grandma. When you hit menopause, and actually there's so much, you know, research about how great oxytocin is when you're caring for like maybe your grandchild, and how good that is for your menopausal hormones. But anyways, this is just to say, we were probably, you know, maybe some combinations are better. You know, I had my first kid at 37. I probably want to have a second one, and I'm 39 now. So when is that going to happen? When I'm 40? Is that a bad thing? From an energy perspective, probably I may be less energetic than if I had been 25 years old. But from my own perspective of even coming to wanting a kid and feeling that I can be there for this kid, I would have not done it earlier. I never thought I was going to have a kid when I was in my 20s, you know, so.
I have a couple of comments. So the first one is I want to just circle back to something that you said, and it's very true. You said at some point we all were kids, right? And there's this thing that I've seen, and I don't know if has something to do with us, you know, from where it's coming from, or if it's the fact that parents are just so used to being criticized by everyone, including other parents, that sometimes as a child-free person, you try to tell somebody, oh, you know, something about their kid, or not necessarily that they're doing it wrong, but you try to like give them some input about something, and they come around and they're like, well, you wouldn't know, you're not a parent. Like, but you said it yourself, you were kids once. So how do you think, I don't know, I just wanted to ask you, what do you think parents are or can be a little bit defensive in that sense?
It's really crazy to be a parent sometimes, right? There is no right and wrong, right? And we're getting more and more used to just having recipes, solutions, to look up things online and find an easy answer. And there are no easy answers. It's very difficult to live with constant uncertainty and soul-searching kind of experiment of, you know, am I just screwing up this person's life, you know, because I decide to do this thing over this thing? And so I think that given that context, it's parents can just be very sensitive and touchy, you know? And so I guess that it'd be great for all of us just to be very open-minded all the time. But oftentimes I feel that, and it happens, I think also in other realms, that when people say something or suggest something, you take it as a personal attack, like you're screwing up, rather than just like, hey, I'm seeing this. Can I give you a suggestion? So, you know, I think, and that's another thing that I think it's great, is like when you are with people that are not parents, they may actually have better perspective than other parents on what's going on with you, you know, because because they're not in the same bubble. They probably sleep more hours. That also helps, you know?
It helps that we don't have we haven't crossed over into that world of parenthood. And so we're still able to see beyond the very subjective position of the worry that you have and the personal guilt feelings and, you know, how's my kid going to feel? Say someone without kids says, I don't understand why parents these days complain about not being able to go to the bathroom without a child outside their door. When I was a child, if I had dared to bother my dad when he didn't want to be bothered, all he would have to do is look at me and I would go away. But I know that there are a lot of parents who have a fear of hurting their kids' feelings. There was a mother in a grocery store who had this little girl asking for something off a shelf. And the mom was saying, I'm sorry, no. And there's this placating thing a lot of parents are doing with kids that at least my dad didn't do. And I learned very quickly not to whine, not to bug him, not to pound on the bathroom door. And I can also see, though, I can imagine having a kid and being and just not wanting to hurt their feelings, not wanting to disappoint them, you know, and someone without kids might be able to say, look, I understand you have that fear. I understand that will hurt you, but this is not about you. This is about your child. You have to think about what's best for the child. And maybe that's going to hurt your feelings, but that's okay because it's not about you. And I think that's where people without kids can maybe kind of shake the parent out of you for a second, you know, the one who's afraid and the one who's very understandably not wanting to disappoint your child or hurt your child or even remotely hint that they might be unloved, because I think that would be really scary. But I think that's where we're very helpful.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think it's very like, you know, as a mom, I find it very hard to find the right balance of like, you know, not kind of losing my shit to like I'm very open to suggestions and everything all the time, but I think it's also a character thing, you know, and like there is something about, you know, I was talking about this with one of my colleagues the other day about how like becoming a parent is also transforming yourself into someone new, right? Because, you know, you are yourself, but then you're also yourself for someone else in a very different way from other relationships because you're responsible for a new life. And that's actually quite, it's quite a lot of responsibility. And there's something in that transformation that we often don't make time for or expect, or really know how to deal with once it happens. I'm saying it from my own perspective, right? Like to me, it was like quite surprising to find how hard it was not to be able to take a break, right? Like you can't take a break unless you have a very supportive partner. But even so, if you're a mother who decides to breastfeed, you don't take a break at the beginning. And it's like, it's quite intense. And so I think there's something about having this new identity whereby it may be easier to define yourself against someone else. So it's kind of against someone who doesn't have kids, rather than really like do the soul searching thing of like, hey, who am I now? And like, what does that even mean? And I think sometimes it's easier to fall into that and be like, now I am someone with kids and you that don't have kids are somewhere else and you won't understand what it's like to be a mom. But it's kind of like, what are you left with if all you did was like kind of just define yourself in relationship with your kid? And so in the end, I always go back to this idea that actually becoming a parent is this transformational thing that should come with a lot of therapy or deep thinking, all the good friends that you can have to give you all, you know what I mean? Like a lot of support, because otherwise you get really lost. And that's something that it's not great.
It's also not something that you see or hear about much on Instagram when you're looking at the, you know, the perfection of parentism. You don't hear that very often.
Don't. And oh my God, you know, like, I think that's one of the things that also I'm interested in doing. It's like, you know, busting the myths around, you know, breastfeeding, like all the things that that you see on Instagram that, you know, the other day I was looking at this feed by this mother of a toddler who got pregnant with triplets, and the feed is like this curated wonder. And I'm just like, I don't even know how you managed to dress these kids.
I would love to see a feed of a mom just capturing those real moments, because this is something that we hear from many mothers. At least, I mean, on my side, I know that Kristen and Lenora have also expressed the same thing. And it is that, I mean, motherhood is just so romanticized in general for everything that you see, not only on Instagram, but on the television, on movies, on, you know, and it's so hard. It's actually really hard. And Lenora has said this before, it's like a sect, you know, like you get recruited, a cult, sorry. The sect is secta in Spanish. Well, yeah. Anyway, it's like a cult. Like you get sucked in because it's so, when the shiny things with the beautiful things. And then when you're in, you're like, oh, fuck, this is really hard. So I wish there were more people like being real out there about this, you know, talking about what it is really to how hard it is to parent, because some people, they want to have babies just for the sake of having a baby or a child or whatever. And they don't really, I don't think they really think about the consequences that that's going to have.
Yeah, and in so many places, you know, I lived in Ecuador and in Argentina and in Venezuela and in Chile. In so many places, that's what you're expected to do. You know, when I got married, which I also never thought I was going to do, but, you know, I got married. And then there was just like this expectation year after year after we were married that the child was going to come. And there was, and people were asking, and it's kind of like, what if we don't want to have children? What if we're trying and we can't? Like, why are you even asking? Why are you even putting that expectation out there, right? And I think it's true that some people don't question themselves, but I think it's also true that not everyone is so introspective and so has the time and the luxury to really be thinking about certain things. And so a lot of people just get pushed in a certain direction because that's where everything else is going, right? You know, the movies and the Instagram feeds and everything. And I totally agree that it's very important to, especially from you know, I'm a writer, but I think from an image perspective, I think it's very important to explore all these elements that are real. And that's actually, you know, one of the ongoing projects we have at the Correspondent with the creative editor is to commission photographers that are going through to, you know, either new mothers or fathers or, you know, that are going through that period of life and how it's disrupting some pillars of life. And so we're thinking about sleep, time, we're thinking about all the desechos, all the kind of the things you get out.
The waste.
All the waste, right? But there's a lot of waste, right? So we're trying to explore keywords and key elements of life that are actually what makes our everyday life. They're actually pillars of just day after day after day and are super real and we don't see so much of, right?
That's a good point. I'm thinking of People magazine, and I only read the People magazine, like the online issue. And every day there's a celebrity pregnancy announcement, and I'm a big celebrity buff. I don't care if they are having kids or not, but there's always pregnancy announcements. And even when there's a so-called in-depth article about the life of a new mom, a celebrity mom, it's still glossy. It's still, oh, but I wouldn't change it. Oh, you know, like they always end it, or it's still pretty enough without going into the realities. And we know that, well, we don't know, but us child-free people don't know that motherhood or parenthood has some good moments. Like we don't know from experience, but we are aware that they exist. People, like you're talking about something that explores reality. And when I see mainstream media like People magazine, that it's still glossy, even when they're talking about things like postpartum depression, about miscarriage, things like that, it's still glossy. It's still in a pretty package. And yes, you've said it sells, and it's true, it does sell. But how, even for those of us that aren't journalists, but are wanting to voice different sides of things. How do we disrupt that prettiness? And I love pretty, I love glamour, hence the hair. But like it's still, how do we unwrap all that, and how do we start to bring in more reality? And even these magazines that have made everything so glossy for so long, how do you start disrupting that or getting rid of it?
Well, I mean, I think it's by being honest, and it's very hard to be honest on social media and in glossy ways, because and I think in a way I feel that there needs to be some courage from Serena Williams, when she spoke of how she almost died because of because she's a Black woman and unfortunately the mortality rates are really high, and like Black women don't get the support they get. And I thought that was very powerful, and we need more real stories like the ones she tells. And I feel that little by little, a little bit more honesty is surfacing when it comes to certain topics. But then I've never seen a mom post pictures of nappies, okay? And I'm not saying that you need to show poop on Instagram. I'm just saying, like, no, don't. But there are so many ways to show how many nappies you consume. You can take pictures of plastic bags that you're throwing out. You can like weigh them. There's so many. That's why like we're looking for artists to really look at this from a different perspective with a different lens. And that's the thing. Who wants to do that? And it goes back to the same question, like, why are we being pitted against each other? Why are we just showing the glossy sides of maternity? And why aren't we being more honest? What's the fear there? And I keep going back to the idea that the fear is very Handmaid's Tale style. It's very much like, we're afraid. What if every woman decides they don't want to have kids anymore? What happens then, right? It's scary.
There is, because you were now talking about the glossy and the glamorized and romanticized part of motherhood, but you also see it on our side from some parents saying, oh, you guys are lazy, all you do is sleep, you have all the time in the world, you have all this money. And it's not necessarily true, not for everyone. I mean, there's many child-free people who have decided to be child-free because they have very serious illness, for example. So they have very painful day-to-day lives that they have to carry on with. There's people that don't have all the money that some parents think that we do. I wish we did, but we don't. Some of us, I wish days were 30 hours long. I don't have all the time in the world. So it's, in the child-free side as well, I think that, yes, we are happy and we celebrate a lot the fact that we made this decision for ourselves, but it's not all roses and unicorns. So I think that's also something that has to be said.
Right. But then it's very hard because you want to be kind of working on the happy side, because then people otherwise just think that, oh, this is this sad person who didn't have a child in time or whatever, And so it's very hard because there is a thing about positive affirmation that is very needed, I think, on both sides. I think there is also a need to be like, oh, and there is this pretty moment, or there's that. And that's what goes on Instagram, right? And I think on the other side, it's the same thing. You're not going to post about how unhappy you are today that you can't afford to go on a trip or whatever. You're going to post when you can go on that trip. And that's where I think it's very important to have personal spaces that are very honest. To begin with, if you can be really honest with your friends about how you're feeling when, for example, they don't invite you to their kid's birthday because they just assume that because you're child-free, you don't care, right? Or things like that. And I think that's where you start creating change. It's in the small actions that then have a bigger repercussion, or that's what I like to hope.
And that is a big issue. Like scrolling through Childfree Reddit, a lot of young people in their 20s who are starting to see their friends have kids And that's the thing, they worry about it because it's like, well, it does change the relationship. And even if your family members that you're close to are starting to have kids and you know that you don't really want them or you're thinking about not having them, and it is scary because the life that you have known with that other person is changing and it's evolving, but you don't know to what. They don't know to what. There's priorities have shifted. How does that, like you said, you are still close with those friends of yours that don't have children. And I mean, it's an effort on both parties, really. How does a child-free, or what would you suggest to approach a friend that's maybe kind of in the new parent bubble and that other person who doesn't have kids is feeling left out? Like, what would you suggest to that person to bring it up to kind of ease whatever insecurity they're feeling or hurtness they're feeling, or, to help maintain the relationship as lives change?
So I think one of the, it really depends the kind of closeness you have. I read this piece actually quite recently about how great it would be to just tell someone who's decided to be child-free, congratulations. I think it would be great to have those conversations and to be really honest and to be able to say, hey, congratulations, it's a very hard decision. Well done on having such clarity and on acting on it.
I think another thing about the honesty of, especially of parenthood, I think it's slightly different for child-free people to be honest about not having a good day or something, because their not good day has nothing to do with kids or lack thereof. It's just anybody else's bad day. Like, oh, I dropped a plant, stubbed my toe, spilled my dinner. It's just a bad day, has nothing to do with kids. But when you have the honesty of parenthood, always eventually come back around to, oh, but there are also these beautiful moments. It's all worth it. I think that's probably true in many cases, but then I think it's just as important to be honest about the parents who truly regret having had kids, because maybe they didn't give it the same amount of thought you did. Maybe all they've seen is it's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it. It's all beautiful. It's all worth it. I understand it's impossible probably to be too honest about regretting having kids because these kids are out there and you don't want them to see it. That's just cruel. But can there be something, is there a way, do you think, to incorporate the reality of the impact maybe of having kids just because, and how that can not only ruin your life, but you write about kids from the you're most concerned about their early years. So you must have seen something about the way kids develop or the way they mold emotionally if they aren't necessarily wanted.
I think this is such a delicate and important subject. It's very hard because I think it's very hard to be honest with yourself when there's other people's interests also involved. It must be hard to get to the moment when you're like, hey, I got married or I got really involved with this person and actually this relationship is not working anymore. It's worse than that because it's someone that you created, right? There's a lot of research about the importance of love and just of being loved, basically, of being hugged and touched, etc. And maybe you can go as far as arguing that if you start regretting having a child, especially in the first few years, it's very hard to have that physical contact, etc., because there is a physical reaction. Plus, there's a lot about postpartum depression is very complicated. It's not just, hey, the hormones, etc. There's something of a shock of like, hey, what have I done? What have I done to myself? There's this other person involved that depends on me, etc., etc. And I think there is a lot in there that we haven't looked at because there's so many taboos around mental health. About it's a huge taboo to be like, oh, I regret having a child. Recently people have started coming out, but just kind of a tiny example. One of my colleagues at the Correspondent, she's a mother. She's based in Nigeria, and she wrote recently during the pandemic something about how she had her child really early, and how she didn't say she regretted having her child, but she really problematized it. And she said something about the real choice you have out there is not to have a child, right? And she got attacked by so many women. And I really came out to defend her, because I think it's so important to problematize these issues, because in the end, it is a lot about how you choose things, and what you do once you have is very, very complex.
I think it's so great to have these conversations, and I think we need to do more of these on the show, not to make it all about parents again and child-free all every episode, but it is really important because within the child-free community, certain spots in the angry child-free community, angry spots within the child-free community, it's almost impossible to have just a conversation between parent and non-parent. And in the last couple of years, receiving emails and messages from women who have kids but had them because they felt pressured into having them, it amazed me the amount, first of all, that existed, and they wanted to talk, like they just wanted to. And I've even had private messages from parents who initially came out of the gate as kind of attacking me, but then I reply back, and then the next email is kind of explaining themselves, how they felt judged and how they feel this and this and this. And really it has nothing to do with me. They just saw something that I posted, it triggered them. And then all of this stuff came out. So parents do want to talk. And I think, I hope that this conversation and other people are inspired to have conversations, whether it's with their friends, their family, from a child-free perspective or a parenting perspective. Obviously, it's really important because we all learn something from each other. And that's the only way that we are going to help the future. Like those of us in the child-free community who speak out publicly, we are thinking about the younger generations. Most of us are not antinatalists. We know that there are going to be more children, and that's fine. And some of them are going to be child-free or decide that they don't want to have kids. So we want to create content that supports that 10, 15 years down the line, right? So for anyone listening who's like, well, why are you having this conversation? Why is it important? It is important because if the two groups continue on and don't talk to one another, we assume things about parents assume things about the child-free, that helps nobody, right? And we just keep reinforcing these stereotypes on both sides. So it's important. Any of you listening, watching, these conversations are important. They're insightful. They're funny. They're entertaining, it's not all bad. Anyway,
I agree. And I thank you so much for having me here, because I think it's also very important to create bridges and to we're not different bubbles. It's we don't have to be in bubbles. We can just kind of burst the bubbles, and then communication is easier. And in the end, we actually learn from each other. And so, I've listened to many of your episodes, and, I learn. It's really important for me to think about, why, when do we start thinking about having children, at what age, what kind of, I remember listening to that episode, and I was like, yeah, it starts when we're kids in many cases. And so it's a cycle.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Irene, for coming on the show. We've really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you for watching. If you have any comments, questions, leave them below. You can reach us via email at childfreegirls@gmail.com, and our website is childfreegirls.com.
If you're looking for us on social media, you can find us primarily on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Yes, all three of those. I think we're not on TikTok anymore. We are on Pinterest, and you can also find us on Amazon, where we have a paperback and Kindle book called Childfree Girls, Comfort Food for Thought. It's really inexpensive, and it's very positive, sometimes funny. If you have a friend, I'm not trying to sell it seriously, I'm telling you, if you have a friend who isn't sure about whether they want kids, if you yourself are feeling pressured, or if you know someone who's feeling pressured, it's it's really good for that. And there are some recipes for when you're feeling all that pressure and you just want pizza or cookies.
Okay. Well, thank you, Irene, for coming. It was a pleasure having you here with us today.
Thank you so much. It was really nice.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Okay. The question.
Why did Irene want kids?
I was going to ask her, but then I was like, oh, this is maybe a little bit off topic.
She was interested in children. She always seemed to, but she did say that she didn't think she'd have kids. Maybe it was because she didn't meet anybody until, she was inspired to have children. Because she's going to have a second one, it sounds like.
But I wanted to know. I really wanted to know. Because in the interest of having this open conversation,
Yeah, I was going to ask her, but then I was like, maybe that's a little bit off topic, because she did say she didn't think she was going to have them, and then she had them at 37, and I was like, yikes, that's my age. Good thing I got my tubes tied. Why didn't I make a party? I should have made a party. Now I need some cake.
On that thing, I don't know how you feel about this, Kristen, but so I don't have my tubes tied. I didn't get tubal done. My thing is I don't want to be cut, and I didn't want a period at all. And so tubal would not help my heavy bleeding. And because people ask me all the time, they're like, do you have your tubes tied or blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no.
What about a hysterectomy?
Well, again, surgery, unnecessary surgery, not doing it. And I've had this conversation. And when I hear more people sharing their tubal, like young age, sharing their tubal, and Isabel's talking about that, being sterilized, because I always liked the idea of it. But for me, I'm like, unnecessary surgery for me personally. And I want to stop bleeding. And so, but I don't want to go into menopause, like all those things. So the IUD luckily has solved all that. And plus I've never really worried about getting pregnant anyway. It was just didn't want bleeding. And I'm sweaty anyway, so menopause I'm like really concerned about. But I have to say, I always feel a bit, I don't know if guilty is too strong of a word, but I feel a little bit slightly insecure that I'm so vocally child-free, so adamantly child-free, but I have not sterilized myself. Which
I'm not sterilized.
Which still has the same effective rate as an IUD anyway. So, it's mainly because no surgery, don't want surgery, and don't want bleeding. But when I hear that, I go, I just had to say that.
Yeah, but you don't have to be sterilized to be child-free.
No, I know. But it's like some people, like, I don't know if you guys pick this up when you're scrolling through and people are talking about how excited they are to be like permanently sterilized, and they go, and for me, I'm like, well, I've 38 and I've gone through this period without having a pregnancy or being pregnant. Like, it's possible. You don't have to be sterilized, because a lot of people freak out on Reddit that they're not sterilized and therefore they're expecting to become pregnant. And between now,
those are Reddit people.
Like, I don't know if I'm making myself clear on that, but it's like you don't have to be sterilized in order to not get pregnant. Like, well, I don't know. Everyone's sex life is different.
I think a lot of people are just really militant. Like the few people, I think most people in the child-free Reddit are pretty decent. And then I think you have those people who are like all or nothing. If you haven't, ripped out your uterus, you're not officially child-free.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's kind of like saying
they're taking their children to the volcano.
From the people who say, if you're going to have sex, you better be prepared to have a baby, and that's also not true. I mean, it's not an absolute thing.
Well, I agree.
Yeah. Anyway, that's off topic from the question, but when that triggered something, I was like.
But I just remembered something that I saw on Facebook this week, and it's a child-free couple, and she found out she was pregnant, and they're both like, oh, fuck. So she's going to get an abortion, and that doesn't make them less child-free, you know what I mean? Like,
she got you got pregnant once.
No,
huh?
Well, because you got pregnant once, so obviously you can't be child-free.
Yeah. Obviously. That's the kind of thing that Sully would say.
Exactly. That's what that is. Totally. Exactly. You looked at a kid. You're not child-free. You have the image of a child. If you have the image of a child in your brain, you are not a child.
Exactly. And today's question for you is, what do you think about child-free people giving advice to parents? You can leave us your comments below here if you're watching us on YouTube, or if you're listening to us on a podcast. There's usually also a place where you can leave comments. And if not, you can always send us an email to the email that Lenora gave you 5 minutes ago.
And don't forget to give us 5-star ratings on our podcast, please. That helps.
Yes.
And subscribe below to our YouTube channel if you're watching. Even if you're not watching, subscribe anyway. We'll figure it out.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye. No, you say bye.
No, you say bye.
Oh my God, I'm leaving.
You leave first.
I'm going.
Bye.
Bye.